Hello ladies and gentlemen. In this video, I'll tell you about one of the most well-studied, over 20,000 studies on PubMed and popular natural substances, the volume of dietary supplement sales in the USA. In 2018, those containing SAPs amounted to $328 million. Its history of use is as long as the history of Ayurveda itself, about 5,000 years, and it has long since secured a spot at the top, which is no small feat, by the way. For those who don't know what the top means, check the description below the video for more information. And personally, I consider it a basic as well as one of the most promising and applicable substances. I wonder if you would have guessed it if it weren't for the title of the video, curcumin. Let's go. Let's start with the basics. Turmeric and curcumin, what are they and what's the difference? To put it simply and concisely, the difference is the same as between coffee and caffeine. Curcuma longa, which is the more accurate name for this flowering plant from the ginger family, is a perennial plant native to the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. It gained the most popularity in India, where it is traditionally used as a curry spice and as a remedy for pain relief, after injuries and also as a dye. And curcumin, first discovered in 1842, or by its chemical name diferyloylmethane, is the main active polyphenol found in turmeric root. It is responsible for all the properties described below and gives the root its characteristic orange color. Curcuminoids, of which curcumin is one representative, are also found in ginger. There's a story that goes like this. Western partners approach a wise Indian man, give him turmeric and say, "Scientists have discovered so many beneficial properties, it prolongs life," and so on, and so on. The Indian, without any divine reverence, tosses the turmeric onto the table, hands the Western partners a volume of Ayurveda and says, "Guys, here's a little book for you. There are still thousands of incredible discoveries waiting for you, which have long been everyday knowledge for the simplest of Indians." The main problem with curcumin, which prevents you from just taking the regular spice, well, you can take it, but it won't do much good. The issue lies in its low bioavailability. Moreover, turmeric itself contains only about 2 to 5% curcumin, which is a very small amount. In order to get even a somewhat significant therapeutic dose, you would have to eat a whole ton of the spice. So, as for the question of whether you can get by with just the spice, I consider that settled. Although you can easily use the spice itself in addition to curcumin or just on its own. By the way, I highly recommend it. It's delicious. Incidentally, I only got acquainted with this substance fairly recently. It happened right before my eyes. I recorded a voice message for my Telegram subscribers, which I do very rarely. Well, simply because at that time there were maybe 5 substances in a row that were completely uninteresting, and honestly, I didn't even want to talk about them. But then, let's say, the advent of curcumin happened. Its effects surprised and delighted me, and by the way, I felt them right after the very first capsule. And what's most interesting is that the main effect was an increase in talkativeness. As far as I can tell, this is a result of reduced inflammation and an overall boost in energy. So I took 2 capsules of curcumin and became more cheerful, happier, and more talkative. I even felt like stretching and dancing a little on the navigation bridge. At that time, I was still working at sea. And from that moment on, to be honest, I got hooked on curcumin. That's it. And now, basically, it's my main supplement, the one that really makes life better. Just as it is. These days, almost every morning for me starts with this substance. And I feel the benefits not only in the long run, but also situationally, especially in the morning. Often I don't exactly feel exhausted, but I don't have a strong desire to get out of bed. No smile, no joy in talking to people. I don't even really feel like saying hello. I drag myself to the bathroom, wash up, and maybe after an hour, I start to feel human. Well, curcumin speeds up this process many times over. Though it's worth noting that curcumin, I almost always use it together with ashwagandha, which has also become a basic supplement for me. But there will probably be a separate video about that. I also noticed for myself that the discomfort after ejaculation is less pronounced. So, the theory that this discomfort is a result of inflammation is quite well supported. And overall, recovery after ejaculation and orgasm happens faster. Let's go over the main claimed effects, and I'll also highlight the ones I personally experienced. Naturally, I won't just recite Wikipedia to you. Let's focus on the most real and essential points, and right away I want to tone down the hype that's common in this area. Curcumin is not a panacea, and you shouldn't expect that it will make you grow a third eye, as you might think when reading about its benefits on some populist website. However, without a doubt, this substance is effective, and its effects are not illusory. You can actually feel them. Unlike some other substances, you just don't need to be foolish, that's all. Like trying to treat, say, AIDS with curcumin. The most important effect is the reduction of inflammation itself. The topic is extremely complex, and it's quite difficult to describe the mechanism in just a few words, but to put it simply, when the body is damaged as a result of injury, illness, exposure to toxins, the environment, or even oxidative stress, inflammation is its natural response. In this way, the body initiates processes of repair and regeneration, but of course this process is not always entirely appropriate. For example, there's the same story about inflammation throughout the body after ejaculation. Inflammation is beneficial in small amounts, but when it occurs unnecessarily, the body begins to harm itself on a microscopic level. And it can be confidently stated that for most people, especially under modern living conditions, there is more inflammation than necessary. A problem also arises when healing takes a long time, the body does not recover, and as a result, remains in an inflamed state for an extended period. This condition is called chronic inflammation. To sum up, the body is often in a state of inflammation, basically for no particular reason. And considering that a high level of inflammation is one of the significant factors of aging, we can conclude that curcumin is one of the main substances that can be used in the concept of life extension, no more, no less. For clarity, take a look at the screens. You can see which diseases are caused by chronic inflammation and the ways in which curcumin affects inflammation. Again, the question is why inflammation is one of the factors of aging. The mechanism for eliminating such cells is called apoptosis. And as you might guess with age, this mechanism deteriorates and the cells cause inflammation. I can't calmly explain the mechanism by which curcumin reduces inflammation as easily as say how to fry an egg. However, to keep things serious, we can highlight the most transparent and well-studied mechanisms. One of the best studied mechanisms is the inhibition of the nuclear factor kappa B. This is a protein that influences the genetic code responsible for the production of inflammatory cytokines. And it's important to understand that almost all inflammatory processes in the body go through NFKB. The second point is the regulation of the activity of an enzyme called cyclooxygenase 2, or COX2. COX2 is one of the most important regulators of inflammation in our body, responsible for converting arachidonic acid into prostaglandins and thromboxanes. These are two lipid compounds that are precisely what cause swelling and the sensation of pain. But obviously by regulating its activity, we can in one way or another influence all the processes in the body and specifically control the balance of inflammation. Because when there is too little of it, that's also bad. In my case, the easiest way to observe the effect of curcumin is on my piercings, on my nipples, yes, I have piercings, and on acne after ejaculation. It's noticeably less. And overall, there's less acne. After maybe a week of taking curcumin, and the most obvious case in my experience happened during a flight. My big toe became inflamed much more than ever before. It even became hard to sleep, and I developed a fever. And just an hour after taking it, I felt significantly better. And that was actually my first encounter with this substance. And in fact, maybe it's because of such a pronounced effect. But that's why I speak so enthusiastically about this substance. There are several studies confirming that curcumin is more effective in treating inflammation than other common anti-inflammatory drugs, including aspirin and ibuprofen. The second important point is the reduction of joint pain. I've already made a video about this. You can watch it if you need more details or more substances, but I can say right away that I missed one substance. It's called boswellia. In fact, the pain decreases significantly. That's a fact. I felt it myself and I'm feeling it even now, standing here in front of the camera. I'll briefly summarize the main point and the previous video and in general so it's clear how this works. As a result of the destruction of joint cartilage, bone tissue on the joint surfaces grows to compensate for the damage. All of this naturally is accompanied by inflammation, and quite significant inflammation at that. And the very first noticeable symptom, pain, is actually relieved quite well by curcumin. Moreover, according to some data, it works even better than non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And the main way in which curcumin specifically promotes joint health is by regulating the activity of two enzymes called, now, once again, these terms are a bit tricky to pronounce, matrix metalloproteinase 3 and matrix metalloproteinase 13. The primary function of these enzymes is to break down collagen and proteoglycan in the joint cartilage. The third effect is its impact on mood and depression. Moreover, the word depression appears in studies much more frequently than mood. In my experience, curcumin, at least for me, had a very weak effect on my mood. Well, I'm just telling it like it is. However, if you read reviews online on various forums, you can find a lot of positive ones. There are quite a few solid theories. The main one is about the impact of inflammation on mood, where it's noted that the synthesis of serotonin and dopamine increases due to a reduction in cortisol, which is also linked to inflammation. And also because of the inhibition of our favorite enzyme, monoamine oxidase, both MAOA and MAOB. And there is even evidence that monocalcumin reduces estradiol, possibly by as much as 40%, and playing with this hormone has a significant effect on mood. There will be a video about this, don't doubt it. But personally, I'm skeptical about this point because here are my test results, which do not show the indicated changes after a month of using curcumin. And by the way, here's your answer to the question, does curcumin increase testosterone? Because that rumor is also floating around the internet, but as you can see, not really. My very humble opinion is that curcumin can affect mood and even depression, but not in all cases and not on a large scale. And most likely, the reason for this effect is synergistic, rather than being due to some isolated mechanism. The fourth point concerns the effect on cognitive functions, and here everything is fairly straightforward. You've already heard from me in the video about lion's mane and about a factor called NGF. Well, there is quite substantial research confirming that curcumin increases Bdnf. This is a slightly different nerve cell growth factor, which also regulates brain growth, in other words, neuroplasticity itself. Undoubtedly, the increase in neurotrophic factors is one of the key tools for influencing the cognitive sphere. And in one study, it was noted that in the control group of rats, curcumin was able to increase BDNF levels by about 140% from the baseline. Of course, we ourselves are not rats, at least not all of us, though sometimes I wish it were true. But you have to admit, it's quite an intriguing point. By the way, another interesting point is that BDNF allows neurons to continue forming new connections even in old age. So here's the thing. The fact is, people suffering from Alzheimer's disease often have low levels of BDNF. And it's logical to assume that BDNF could slow down, cure, or even reverse this disease. And another interesting fact is that in those parts of India where curry is used in food, Alzheimer's disease is almost non-existent. In general, the topic of growth factors deserves a separate video since it's a really juicy subject, so I won't dwell on it too much here. I will note though that I haven't noticed any incredible effects of curcumin on my own memory, concentration, or learning ability. Lion's mane shows itself to be much more powerful in this aspect. But there's a nuance here. For BDNF to increase significantly, curcumin has to cross the blood-brain barrier, and not all forms can do that. I'll talk more about this later. By the way, according to research, high levels of BDNF can also affect mood, so there's another correlation there. And the last effect I'll mention, well, because there are so many effects, you really have to choose the ones that are most prominent, and those are its antioxidant properties. Oxidative stress is also one of the factors of aging. One of the strongest oxidative compounds produced by our brain is superoxide, which is generated from oxygen. Curcumin has the ability to neutralize this superoxide. And thanks to this mechanism, it can significantly contribute to maintaining a healthy level of brain oxidation. Compounds that balance oxidation can neutralize free radicals. Let me remind you that free radicals are naturally produced as a byproduct of cellular oxidation. And if the activity of free radicals is not stopped, they can damage cells and DNA, which with age can lead to various possible diseases. And curcumin proves to be quite effective, well, I wouldn't say extremely so. Not the most effective of all possible remedies, but still quite effective in combating oxidative stress on two fronts. First, it can neutralize free radicals that cause diseases and thus help prevent various types of damage. And second, it activates antioxidant enzymes that enhance the body's own defense system against oxidative stress. These, in my opinion, are all the main mechanisms, of course. If you dig deeper, you can also find that curcumin affects ALT and AST levels by promoting bile excretion from the liver. It also helps lower blood pressure and thin the blood. There have been studies noting its anti-cancer effects, as well as its ability to lower cholesterol, glucose, and much more. But I tend to believe that its anti-inflammatory effect is the foundation. That's what makes curcumin mostly interesting. Everything else, well, let's just say, is a nice complementary addition. Although, I repeat, this is just my opinion. Now, a few words about the dangers of curcumin. You can read online about what exactly is dangerous in the listed substances. I don't have the time to list low probability nonsense desires. I will only say that practically all the theses that I analyzed on this topic did not convince me. As a person who has been interested in this topic for quite some time, I understand the mechanism of this anti-hype. In fact, it's the same hype, just another way. Imagine there's some common opinion, everyone's used to it, and then some completely unknown, irrelevant Vasya or Petya starts shouting at the top of his lungs, posting the exact opposite opinion everywhere. I think you'll agree that such an opinion will attract more interest than the common one. And there's another scenario that I've noticed specifically in the Russian segment, when some paranoid person with a large audience claims there's danger or potential danger. That's the whole play. 4,000 years of practice, thousands of studies, and millions of experiments show that yes, there can be complications, yes, there can be individual intolerance, but no more than with other substances. There's also the possibility of using a substance in the wrong way. For example, some stubborn hater of supplements decides to eat curcumin straight from turmeric and chokes on horse-sized doses. This can happen with spices too, it happens often, and anything can get sick from that, but is it really the curcumin's fault? Moreover, generally, if there is individual intolerance, as in all cases, we simply remove the substance from the stack. But otherwise, I don't see a single reason to reject this substance. But since I prepared for this video very thoroughly, and I want to be as accurate and unbiased as possible, I still have to point out one thing: turmeric, due to its properties, very easily absorbs heavy metals from the environment. Accordingly, if it is grown in polluted regions, as you might guess, it can absorb and concentrate heavy metals in its roots. What's even worse, turmeric can regularly contain lead chromate, which also has a bright yellow-orange color. And even in food products from US stores, samples of turmeric powder have been found to be contaminated with lead chromate. One study showed that to give turmeric a bright yellow color, it is sometimes adulterated with lead chromate in Bangladesh, one of the dominant regions where turmeric is grown. Naturally, as always, there is only one solution here. Buy from places where you can be sure that what you're purchasing is truly high quality, and preferably from places where every batch is tested for both beneficial and harmful substances. Most of you already know where to do this, but I'll talk more about it later. And very rarely, personally I haven't encountered this, it's possible to observe a decrease in libido because there are, well, very few, but still some studies that show turmeric may inhibit 5-alpha reductase, thereby naturally lowering DHT. Let me remind you, DHT is even more androgenically active than testosterone. But just like with lion's mane, everything quickly returns to normal. Within a week or 2 or 3, your libido will be back to the same level as before. Now here's some information you definitely won't find in the Russian segment, at least not in video format, the different forms of turmeric. Curcumin. So, let's slow down the speed from 2.0 or 1.5 to at least 1.25 and pay attention. What types are there, how do they differ, and which should you choose? To make the information a bit easier to digest, I'll note right away that most of the different forms are mainly distinguished by their bioavailability. As I've already mentioned, curcumin is a very finicky compound, so don't overthink it, just try to grasp the main points. The key points, because honestly this information isn't very simple. The first and simplest form is regular curcumin concentrate. It's usually inexpensive, but its bioavailability is extremely low. I've had experience with it. I've tried this kind of curcumin, specifically Natropix depot. Of course, there are absolutely no quality issues, but to really feel a significant effect, you have to take higher doses, which isn't great and in fact isn't very economical either, in the end. But there's a well-known life hack that I've already talked about using bioperine in combination, which increases bioavailability. Curcumin's bioavailability increases by as much as 2000%. Piperine significantly increases intestinal permeability by inhibiting a liver process called glucuronidation. Basically, that's an accelerated metabolism. Glucuronidation is responsible for removing various substances from the body, and unfortunately curcumin is one of those substances. So naturally, by inhibiting glucuronidation, we can significantly increase the bioavailability of curcumin. However, there's a nuance. Curcumin with piperine isn't entirely flawless. This is because piperine can also increase the concentration of undesirable compounds in the body. In addition to this, piperine does not significantly increase the absorption of curcumin by the brain naturally. And this second aspect is really critical, especially if of course the goal is to increase Bdnf. But don't worry, I'll explain next how you can get around this situation, preserving both the effects of regular curcumin and the kind that crosses the blood-brain barrier. And in general, of course, it's worth noting that using curcumin with piperine can cause some side effects, since piperine significantly increases intestinal permeability. The solution? Yes. Is it optimal? That's a more interesting question. Most likely it's just one of the reasonable options, or an option for those on a budget. Or for those who don't have access to the really good stuff, the second form is Kurovaipa. Sometimes I tell you about things you simply won't find any information about in the Russian segment. It's simply so that you can develop, so that your taste can develop, so to speak. It's like, during World War II in blockaded Leningrad, people would read the classics on an empty stomach that hadn't seen food in a long time. But still, they didn't turn into animals. So I suggest you also aim for the highest standards and not turn into animals who grab any kind of trash from sazan or wild berries without thinking. The essence of this rare form is that the curcumin in this form does not stain. Let me remind you that turmeric is quite a common dye. And if you drop turmeric, say, on a white shirt, that's it, it's over. And also it doesn't have the characteristic smell of curcumin. An American company, Aura Biolabs, has developed a new method that allows for preliminary metabolizing curcumin into its metabolites, which eliminates the unpleasant features mentioned above from the product. Bioavailability also increases with this preparation process. The third form is water-soluble full-spectrum curcumin, which is most often used in formulas by the company Solgar, a fairly well-known brand. And the main point is that this type of curcumin is 185 times more bioavailable than regular curcumin. For example, 95% is initially used to achieve this goal, specifically the 95% form. A standard curcumin extract is used as the starting point, followed by a patented process to reduce particle size and encapsulate the curcuminoids. Hydrophilic, meaning water-loving, spheres called micelles. This transforms the opaque powder into a clear liquid, which allows curcumin to easily enter the bloodstream and remain in the body for 24 hours. Actually, it's a really cool option, but there's one catch. The price is $1.50 per capsule. And in my experience, I need at least 2 capsules. And that, as you can imagine, hits your wallet. The fourth form is so-called therakurmin, or curcumin nanoparticles. It was developed by the Japanese. I tried this one. The idea here is that tiny particles are made and combined with resin to form a microscopically dispersible agent. The bioavailability is 27 times higher. Basically, it's a decent form. That's the one I started my experience with. I could feel its effects, so I can recommend it. But of course, without any excesses, let's say without any spectacular advantages. The fifth form is quite well known, Meriva. It's used by some very reputable brands, like Thorne, for example. The point is that, in addition to curcuminoid, it also contains soy lecithin and microcrystalline cellulose. Here we can highlight a term like phytosome. This is a complex of lecithin with any bioactive molecules. In this case, the basis is a fairly common and understandable factor. Curcumin is better absorbed with fats. So, to put it simply, the formula of curcumin The curcumin molecule is encapsulated in a fat shell, which ensures better bioavailability. In this case, it's also H29. Basically, that's not bad either. I'd say it's something of a gold standard. The sixth form is BSN95 or biocurcumin. There's nothing tricky here either. The increase in bioavailability is due to the fats in the composition. The composition combines curcumin with one of the important active ingredients of turmeric oil. Our turmeron is used quite often in good brands, such as, for example, Life Extension and Gero, so it has its place. But now the most interesting, the seventh form. One of my favorites is called Longvida, and besides me, it is considered by many to be one of the most interesting nootropics with a depot effect, no more, no less. And for me, the opinion of this company is much more important than the opinions of so-called couch experts. This form was developed in collaboration with neuroscientists from the University of California, Los Angeles. In this composition, curcumin is packaged in a lipophilic matrix that attracts fat molecules. Thanks to this, curcumin dissolves not in the stomach, but in the intestines. And thanks to this, a high level of curcumin is maintained for as long as 24 hours. Accordingly, this means that a single dose of Longvida can have a positive effect throughout the entire day without the need for a repeated dose. This is a very important point. In addition, Longvida is 95 times more bioavailable. And here's the most important thing. It is able to cross the blood-brain barrier, which means we can benefit from all the advantages of increased Bdnf, most importantly, neuroplasticity. Moreover, there's a really cool point. I've been debating whether to include it, but I'll go ahead and mention it for the experts, so to speak. Such curcumin with very high bioavailability can support the body's production of DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. I talked about it in the video about omega-3. Let me remind you, this is an essential omega-3 fatty acid. Essential. That means it is either poorly produced in the body or not produced at all, which has a very positive and in general a very strong effect on the cognitive sphere. So in the case of DHA, the body can still synthesize a certain amount from alpha-linolenic acid. Now, curcumin with very high bioavailability, just imagine, preserves the existing DHA in the brain. It is also responsible for converting alpha-linolenic acid into DHA. And it seems like everything is great. We found the ideal, and you could just use it alone. However, no, I still have to point out, in order to be as unbiased as possible, that according to various empirical studies, this form actually has a worse effect on inflammation than even the concentrate. So, precisely in the most important aspect, in its anti-inflammatory properties, this form falls a bit short. And finally, the eighth form for today, although in reality there are a few more, but there's nothing particularly interesting about them. This is a kind of liquid synthesized curcumin with a bioavailability as high as 99.6%, which contains lecithin, succinic acid, and water with colloidal silver. The form of this curcumin is similar to the one used in supplements from the company Solgar, which we already discussed today, but with one very significant advantage. This curcumin is produced by a company from Nizhny Novgorod, and I almost want to spit for good luck, even though I'm not very superstitious. But apparently this is a reputable company that approaches its work according to Western standards. At least that's the impression at the time of filming this video. That's exactly my opinion. And yes, this is the very product that I presented a long time ago on Telegram as one of the few interesting options I managed to find on the Russian market. So don't expect anything else interesting except for CBD oil. It was from this particular curcumin that I felt a very slight but still noticeable effect on my mood. Therefore, it can be assumed that it somehow affects serotonin and dopamine. What I also liked in this case is that the manufacturers don't claim that this is the world's first, most unique, and so on, as others like to do, even though the form is actually quite rare, and indeed there really aren't that many liquid options in the world in principle. To most Russian manufacturers, I want to say, at least try to reproduce well and with quality what already exists. That alone would be a big achievement. I even got interested, did some digging and found out who invented this form of curcumin in Russia, a typical, somewhat eccentric Russian scientist. I can share the info if anyone needs it. I'm ready to work with this company. At least for now. I mean, I don't know what will happen next. Maybe the quality will get worse. I have no idea what the future holds, but right now, at this moment, based on the photos and videos, that's how it is. Because I use the product myself. This is one of my main professional principles. I only recommend what I use myself or would use. So, promo code Armenian, links to the website are in the description. And for almost the first time in my life, I don't feel any, awkwardness about recommending something on the Russian market. But if we're talking on a larger scale, because some people might have access to Herba and Tropics Depot, which form should you choose? That's up to you. I think you understood and listened carefully that there are no perfect forms. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages. There are the most interesting ones, my favorites, which as always you can find at the top of the description. But if you're a maximalist and want god-level biohacking, you can use my method. It's a mix of different forms. For example, take something like Longvida, which crosses the blood-brain barrier well but is weak at reducing inflammation, and mix it. Mix it, for instance, with terracurcumin. As a result, you get the advantages of both forms. Now, about dosages, obviously a lot depends on the form. If you take the standard ones, it's from 300 mg to 2 GE. Preferably with 10-20 mg of bioperin. You can split it into 2 doses, and it's highly recommended to take it with fatty food. I've already explained why. Regarding other forms, I won't list them all. Let's highlight, for example, Longvida. In this case, I can recommend 300-500 mg per day. Once a day is enough, there's no need to take it twice because remember, it works for 24 hours. Everything else is as usual. As for the duration of the course, for all forms it's 2 to 3 months, and you can take a break after 1 to 2 months. And yes, that doesn't mean continuously. Non-stop means regular alternating courses. There is a difference, and that's almost always the case. These recommendations, fall into the category of can do, not must do, or absolutely necessary. Let me remind you that, in principle, I don't recommend taking any substance non-stop. Not even yohimbine, because in some cases it can lower libido. That's one thing, and secondly, there's such a concept as psychological tolerance. By the way, another tip, if you have omega-3 in your stack, it's actually very beneficial to take curcumin closer to your omega-3 intake. That's how it turned out. In my opinion, the material is pretty good, even though the substance we discussed is, honestly quite complicated to describe. It's very easy to get confused by the terminology. You need to explain things simply because the audience is diverse, and at the same time keep in mind the complexity of all the mechanisms, because even something like inflammation is an extremely complicated topic. Curcumin has long deserved attention. For me, for example, an important nuance was that this is also the main supplement for David Toman, whose opinion I honestly consider more authoritative than all the figures in the Russian segment combined. A personal piece of advice from me to those who don't have the budget or access to quality substances: don't just grab the first curcumin supplement you come across. Especially if it doesn't contain bioperine, so you don't end up complaining later that it doesn't work. Curcumin is truly one of those substances whose effects are quite noticeable. And in my opinion, it really deserves attention as a supplement for long-term use, even if it's just for preventive purposes. You might miss out on something really worthwhile simply because of an incorrect approach. If one form doesn't work for you, just try another. That's all for now. Thank you for your attention. As usual, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and definitely leave your comments. Share your experiences with turmeric, curcumin, or just your thoughts on everything discussed. Thank you. Bye. Like the video, hit the bell, leave your comments. I read everything and keep an eye on it all.